On the agenda is our City Council staff report by Deborah Owen, our City Clerk.
Hi, just a brief update, just to let you know that the council was gifted this. It is the first agenda of a city council meeting after we became a home rule charter city. It is from Dan Nelson. He didn't want to have a big presentation at a 7 o'clock meeting, but wanted to gift it to the council and to have it stay as part of the Carnegie Town Hall or in some other location of the council's desire in the future. So we'll be displaying it. And then tonight at 7 o'clock, we'll pass around a letter for you to say thank you and sign. And that's all. Thank you.
Next item is Mayor Munson.
Yeah, I'd ask that Mark Cotter from Public Works come up and just give you a quick overview on what we're doing on the street potholes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Today we put together just a short presentation to provide some additional information that reinforces the press release that went out last week on some of the proactive communication that we're going to do this week on the pothole approach, the 2010 capital program, and as well as our key project for the year, which is 41st Street. This year we'll invest about $33 million into the city streets, and that will come primarily from two CIP programs, street CIP and engineering, and that will also show a marked improvement on about 1,200 city blocks. This week's events are going to start with an on-site Tuesday again. This is mostly predicated on weather permitting, but Tuesday we want to be out on West Avenue and just show you all the steps that Galen Huber and his team take to make sure that we can address the potholes. That'll be on West Avenue between Madison Street and 6th Street. Should be good parking out there on the service roads, and then walk in, obviously, to the construction site with caution, and then hopefully we can also answer your questions. Galen will also have those roving pothole patchers there as well, so you can see the difference between using hot mixed asphalt and those roving pothole patchers that we have two of those in the city. Wednesday we'll highlight the capital program, which will be at the Chamber of Commerce. One of the key intersections that we'll do this year is improving 8th and Phillips. 8th Street will be improved from Main to the Big Sioux River Bridge, and we're just finalizing some of those renderings of what that streetscape will look like, so you'll see, obviously, be able to look out, see what the street condition looks like today, and then what it's expected to look like at the end of the summer. And then last, there's been a lot of work on the 41st Street Bridge. If you drive out there now, most of those utilities, private and public, have been moved out and away from the bridge, so the contractor does not have to do extensive utility coordination during the project to really deliver the bridge from demolition through construction. But one of the key aspects that's underway is all the precast elements that are being made today at Gage Brothers, and they've been underway for about 3 weeks, and they expect to continue that process through May. That one again is greatly predicated on weather. All right, first of all, the potholes. I think there's obviously been a lot of discussion about potholes and why did we announce more of an aggressive approach now? Well, there's a number of factors. First of all, the snow has finally stopped for the most part. We will normally get some snow in March, but we're finally under a widespread melt. We've got some reasonable temperatures to actually go out there, not have to deal with ice in the holes. Any time prior to this, there's all those potholes, usually at least in the bottom portion of those, are full of ice. You can't appropriately prepare them to do a permanent patch. So weather's been one of the most significant issues. And then again, we can shift from what we'll talk about and what you'll be able to see in the field tomorrow from more of the temporary approach where there's very little prep to the permanent approach where there's extensive prep. Workforce and materials, we've got, at least at this point, mostly will be comprised of public works staff, but just like during the snow removal process, if we need additional help, Parks Department has already stepped up and said that they'll loan employees as needed, and so we're fortunate to have that partnership that we have with multiple city departments. You've heard about us talk about in fact sheets and on the news how we now use hot mixed asphalt, which is as we take recycled asphalt off streets, In 2007, the city street department recommended, after research, to actually buy a mobile hot plant. It produces about 10 tons per hour at optimum, and so now instead of going out with cold material, we can go out with hot material. It's a very good product, so you'll see that. And then again, the right equipment. We've invested in these hot insulated boxes. We expect to continue to invest in them and actually transition away from those roadway patchers. And again, tomorrow we can highlight a lot more of why we want to transition away from that cold approach to the hot approach. What's the change in approach? Essentially, we've had one crew per day out, and now with moderate weather, we know if we put more resources to it, we're going to make significant gains. So we'll go from one crew to 3-day crews. We've divided the city into 3 zones, which we'll show you in a moment, and then we'll run at least one night crew. And we're going to make every effort to run 2 night crews, and the night crews will focus on the extremely high-traveled roads, Minnesota Avenue, 41st Street, Russell Street, some of those areas where it's not safe for the traveling public when we're out there, and it's also not safe for our own teams to be out there. So those are that's the true shift. We also, through this whole process, we've continued to run those pothole patchers. This just gives you a sense of how the city will be divided for those zones. And just like this is all built off the snow removal map, which we will focus first on emergency snow routes and then secondary routes, and then we'll start to go systematically through the neighborhoods. We do need probably another 10 days for those neighborhood streets to melt if you've been out. In some cases, those neighborhood streets still have snow 4 to 5 feet in. And we'd obviously like that to get melted and drain away so we can get a good dry surface. But as we complete the emergencies and secondaries, we will start systematically going into all the local streets. Okay. We've just got about a 3-minute video here just to show you this is the piece of equipment that's really changed our process and really has allowed us to move to a hot material. That's the crews actually breaking up some of the asphalt, and then it gets loaded into the recycling machine, which one of the keys here is just so we can actually produce 300-degree temperature. You can see some text on top to follow along. That's the finished product. Comes out at 300 degrees and then gets dumped into, you'll see the opening of those portable hot boxes. That hot box that travels around town holds 4 tons. It's heated and it's insulated, and so you can keep the material hot for an extended period of time. Again, first, we're obviously still into a citywide melt. The edges of the streets still do have snow on them where we did not pick up snow or didn't get it back far enough for the melt to start. So first you got to remove the water as best you can, and that's normally done with air. And again, obviously, as it gets warmer, we'll be using oil tack, and then this is the hot mixed asphalt. That's 300 degrees going in, and then it gets plate packed.
Mr. Cutter?
Yes. Okay. Ready? I think we're going to advance to the next slide. Okay, now, just as an anecdotal note, obviously this isn't isolated to Sioux Falls. You know, I've personally been in Omaha and Minneapolis in the last 2 weeks, and I think, too, if you read some of their local newspapers, they're in similar shape. We just read an article last week that Minneapolis went from 5 crews up to 10 crews. Colorado Springs is running with about 9 crews, and they have twice the lane miles, but they're only running day shifts. Combined with day and night shifts, we'll have 5 crews, and we'll also have 2 roving potholes patching. So we hope to make a marked improvement in the next 3 weeks and really be able to get these streets back into a good spring shape. Now, just the other 2 items that will be highlighted this week is the 2010 program. Again, significant amount of street work that's planned through and across the city, from maintenance, preservation, all the way through reconstruction and expansion projects. These maps will be printed and available at the Chamber of Commerce, and so we encourage everyone to come get their maps. We'll also have some of our most significant designs that will affect people's travel throughout the year, and we'll have those respective engineers, whether they've been designed internally or externally, so you can ask them what's the project cost, what's the expected phasing, some of those detailed questions that those engineers can answer. Go to the next slide. Okay, we just put together a collection of pictures that, as we address our capital needs from maintenance, which is addressing random cracks, all the way through construction. I'll let you just go through some of those. This is microsurfacing treatment after it's been performed. This is concrete joint and spall repair up in the upper left. That's a spall joint. That's when you have the edges of those pavements that have spalled away. And then the during is in the upper right, where we're actually removing some of those poor joints. And then the final picture is the restored joints, a working joint. We're going to be in 4 different neighborhoods this year, reconstructing 23 residential blocks. That's just a before and after picture. Had a lot of shades, so I didn't have a great picture for you, but just the key will be is that we will be in 4 residential areas. This is our 3rd year of a program. We set out a goal with the mayor to reconstruct 100 blocks in 5 years. We should accomplish that in 4 to really get ahead of some of these areas that we've had we've got some neighborhood streets that really needed to be reconstructed and brought back up to standards, as well as address their utility needs. Next slide. All right, now for some of the key projects. This is obviously one of them. This is where the event will be held. It'll be inside the Chamber of Commerce lobby. But this is the before, and then there's the rendering of 8th Street, 8th and Phillips. Essentially carrying through those same streetscape themes that you've seen throughout Phillips Avenue and portions of Main Avenue, and we're excited to get this project done. The pavement condition out there certainly justifies it. Some of the other projects that are certainly going to, maybe one more back. Some of the other projects that you'll see this year, we've talked a lot about, is River Boulevard. Western Heights, we're continuing to make improvements out there with the water mains, but it also affects a number of the streets. Airbase, we'll have another significant project in the airbase to update those aged water mains, and then conversely improves the street. 57th Street, there's a significant project between Minnesota Avenue and Pembroke to really reestablish good sight lines, and we'll have some detailed drawings that day of that project. 69th Street extension and railroad overpass by Sioux Falls Christian School, and then continuing further east as we connect in with Southeastern, there is a dual lane roundabout that we just bid last week, had fantastic bids. And then the 49th Street extension, we'll get started on this project. This was last year we put 2 projects on hold, 57th Street and the 49th Street extension. This 49th Street extension would reconstruct the road between Minnesota Avenue and Duluth and then bring Grange Drive up. And so we're excited to bring those projects forward. Some of the things that we're doing just in advance of seeing this very competitive bidding is that we have accelerated design on 3 additional projects to get those on the shelf. If the event comes that we continue to see the savings, those 3 projects are 10th and Cliff. We're going to do an interim project, which is to mill some of the tie-in points, and then we'll do a thick overlay so we don't have some of the failures that we did this last fall with the amount of rain that we received in January. Minnesota Avenue is our next focus point, which should be from 18th Street to 8th Street, and then 41st Street from I-29 to Marion Road. And both of those would be a combination of panel and joint improvements. Now, one of the things you won't see in detail in our 2010 capital program, but are going to be a significant amount of work to our area that were either bid last year or they're in the state's capital program, is the 41st Street Bridge. It's about a $7 million project. Phase 2 of the levee work was announced. It did go to a local contracting team, and that's about a $12 million project. Marion Road interchange off I-90, that's scheduled to bid very soon. That's likely a $12 million transportation improvement project, and it'll be a great connection for us to I-90. South Dakota 100 was bid last week, which is another mile. It is the 1 mile of Sioux Falls out of the 17 miles is financially, by agreement, responsible for. And so that project was bid. That also went to a local contractor, and that'll get underway. And the other significant project is another bridge, is the Solbrook Bridge over I-229. That will connect 59th Street with 69th Street. So just the collection of those projects are about an additional $45 million worth of work in addition to the $33 million worth of work that we initially started with. And then last but not least, that we'll also start all the design work that gets us ready for the 2011 program. Last slide. And then again, last part of our media outlet to communicate the programs for this year is that we do expect to do an event at Gage Brothers, and it is to highlight the bridge beams. They are, the piers are what's out in the river, and then it's the beams that actually will carry the traffic. They're enormous precast materials, and they will really help the accelerated bridge construction and really allow us to deliver the project. So. Trying to keep this brief today, but just wanted to add some additional credence to the information that's going to be available this week. We're going to have Kevin Smith will be with us, Galen Huber will be with us, and so as you have questions at the events, please contact one of us, and we'll do our best to actually get your questions answered.
Mark, I think a lot of citizens are concerned about the condition of the streets, but I think they also identify that, potholes are a part of life in South Dakota in February and March. But given the fact that it's been such a tough winter on the roads, are you certain that you have adequate resources and equipment to address the issue, and are you confident that within 3 weeks' time, provided there's good weather, that we will have a marketed improvement in the roads?
I am. I think one of the limiting factors that we do have is that, there is, resources are one thing in people and equipment, but we're running our hot mixed asphalt machine really to its limit. And so that, to me, is you always look at, in your system, what's the weakest link, and then that, to me, is what you back into your resources plan. And, but we will still take calls first. That'll be our first priority, and then with the zoning of the city. And if weather can continue to improve these amount of resources, you'll really start to see the potholes improve. Understand, we do street maintenance throughout the entire year, whether it's skin patching, all different types of activities, but our focus in the next 3 weeks will really be to put a lot of people and material and equipment at the potholes.
Is that something that we're going to want to consider the next budget cycle, another hot mix recycling piece of equipment, or a larger one, or what?
Well, we bought the largest one, so that's, okay. I think we feel confident with this. I think we also recognize that everyone in the region is saying this is such an abnormal year. You know, people say it hasn't been this bad in 10 years, hasn't been this bad in 20 years. I think what, Counselor, what you will see us do is that as we surplus those roving pothole patchers, we're going to buy more of these hot insulated boxes so we can just do a much better job with the materials that we have, as opposed, and those actually have a use, and they can actually deliver a good job if they don't have the amount of traffic like we do. And so there are agencies like counties that can probably use those machines a little bit better, and then obviously a little bit favorable weather would even be better.
Councilor Litz, did you have a question?
It was answered subsequently through the presentation. Thank you.
Councilor Staggers?
Yes, Mark, you mentioned, tomorrow we're going to have some activities. What time are those?
2 o'clock. They'll be on the press release. We'll also do
Okay.
an updated press release as well.
Oh, okay. And then also, too, the pothole patcher trucks, how many of those do we have?
We have 2.
And once again, those are the same trucks you're thinking about then just
We're going to
giving
surplus those
surpluses.
for, we'll obviously have value. We use multiple sources to sell that specialized piece of equipment. Likely it'll be an iron plant, and then we'll just reinvest that right back into the same program, only what we believe is a better way.
And then also, too, you mentioned about some of the additional work we're going to be doing, like the Solberg Avenue Bridge. What's the status on the 49th Street extension?
Well, the 49th Street extensions, I don't have a photo of it, but we'll highlight it at the chamber. I just spoke to the VFW the other night, and again, that program is one of the 2 we put on hold last year. 57th Street was one from Pembroke to Minnesota, and we've bid that project, and we're ready to get started. 49th Street, our goal is to finish the last right-of-way negotiation and then construct that road full width from Minnesota to Duluth. So it'll, if you know that area well, and then we'll tie in Grange Drive. Right now, Grange Drive somewhat parallels the interstate off-ramp, and we'll tie it in so we have a nice 90-degree intersection at Duluth and 49th Street.
And I know it might be difficult to know when we're going to plan to do that. Any tentative?
Right now, we're anticipating a bid date in June.
Oh, okay. And do we have all the, you mentioned purchasing some of the land. How many more parcels do we have to deal with?
Well, we have 2,
Two,
and
yeah.
we're in very good active discussions with both. So I expect that we'll be able to meet that time frame.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mark?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to Audit Committee. I don't think there's any report there. Greg, did you have anything?
No report.
Okay. Fiscal Committee.
No report.
Land Use Committee.
No report?
Public Services Committee.
We will meet immediately following this meeting. Our one agenda item is the wheelchair transport issue.
City Council open discussion.
It's easy for you to say.
Councilor Staggers.
Well, in one of my classes today at USF, one of the students was asking about the city charter and the increase or not having an increase for the city council members and the mayor because of the charter says that, we follow the rate of inflation, but we also have deflation. Does anybody know? Last year, the state said we were officially had deflation of 0.7%.
I believe our pay actually goes down 1.4%.
That's correct.
In 2010, correct?
Okay.
correct.
Okay, so it's
I believe it's 1.4%, isn't it?
No, that's correct.
1.4. Okay, I'll tell them that then.
Any other open discussion? Okay, we'll move into our presentations. The first one is the 2010 Sculpture Walk program presented by Jim Clark and Director and Sculpture Walk Director Russ Sorensen, Urban Planner.
Good afternoon. Good to be here. Jim Clark, Sculpture Walk Director, 7th year. Very excited about the quality and variety of our sculptures that will be coming for 2010. I think this is going to be our best year ever. We're going to have 47 artists from 21 states and 3 other countries participating. The countries are China, England, and Canada. There are 19 new artists, and that level of turnover is very healthy for the program. Sculpture Walk is financially strong, and our site sponsorships are full at 51. The city's cut of 15% from your participation of the budget will not have a negative effect on the program. We're in good shape. All the sculptures and the sites have been reviewed and approved by the Visual Arts Commission and the ADA Board. A little trivia on the program. Over 6 years, 290 sculptures have gone through downtown. 80 sculptures have been sold, and 18 are currently being leased, and Avera Hospital has a 16-sculpture indoor program. Outside of Sculpture Walk, sculptures have been placed at over 22 public sites around the city. Over 30 days between April 24th and May 24th, we'll move 146 sculptures once, and some twice, and some 3 times, taking down 2009, putting up 2010, and moving some of the sold and leased sculptures. Time is short, so I'll move quickly through the sculptures, and she's already advanced quite a ways. I suppose we should start over, but this should only take about 10 to 12 minutes, I think. The sculpture walk starts in the south plaza of the pavilion. And the first sculpture, they're all, we have really good-sized sculptures this year. Many are over 5 and 6 feet tall. This one is 6 feet tall. It's from Sergei, actually from Russia, lives in British Columbia, Canada. He's bringing 2 sculptures down. This will fit nicely in the south plaza. It's aluminum, shiny aluminum. Greg Johnson is the next sculpture. This is in front of Home Federal. He won the People's Choice a couple of years ago. Another nice-sized sculpture, 56 inches high, a bronze. Then we move down onto Phillips Avenue, and we're going to be going north. But this is in front of where the Great Outdoor Store used to be, in the northwest corner of 11th and Phillips. The Shaman, 40 inches high, very nice bronze sculpture, Pokey Park. Reading Magic is in front of the book shop. I had a perfect sculpture for there. And then moving down in front of the Carpenter condos is Foul Ball, done by Lee Badger, and it has geese and ducks and chickens on it. And then the next one in front of Mrs. Murphy's Irish Gifts is the Mom sculpture, and this is the mate to the Potato Man that we had a couple years ago, and that's in McKinnon Park. American Kestrel, Dennis Klein, has been in Sculpture Walk several years. This is his sculpture this year, 36 inches high in front of Prairie Star Gallery. Flower Dancing in the Wind, new artist, Jerry McKellar from Washington. Another very nice-sized sculpture. This is going to go on the city permanent pedestal on the southwest corner of 10th and Phillips and will be illuminated at night. And across the street to the north is Resurgence by Chris Powell. I should have told you in the beginning that what you're seeing are photos and sketches that the artists submit when they submit their entry. So Chris always submits a sketch, but we know his work is very good. And that's a big sculpture as well. Persona by Joe Sackett, and another new artist from New Mexico. This will go into the planter by the clock, south of the diner. And then next to it, we're going to put 2 smaller sculptures. This is the Silence by Tom Herzog, and in his style of sculpture, stacked slate. And then next to it is Harmony by Kun Zhang from China. And he is going to be he's actually traveling to Sioux Falls. He's going to be spending anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks in Sioux Falls and in South Dakota, going out to Mount Rushmore and Crazy Horse. And then in front of the diner, we have Tiger and Cub by Dolores Shalady of Utah, and we add a little humor here with the next sculpture. They're going to be looking at the sheep that will be where we had the 3 little pigs a couple years ago by the fountain there. And then back between the fountain and the diner is going to be Red Cloud by Doug Bienick, another new artist from Minnesota, a nice-sized marble. And then on the north side of the fountain is Katrina by Osamid Obazi, and he's very stylistic with his sculpture, and that's going to be north of the fountain. And then on Phillips, moving towards 9th, mid-block will be Quarks 6 by Guy Bellevere from Chicago, a nice abstract, and we do have more abstract this year. Checkup by Carol Cunningham. He actually has a stethoscope on the dog. And this is on the southwest corner of 9th and Phillips. The doctors should like, and vets should like this one. Over on Main Avenue in front of First Dakota National Bank, northwest corner of 9th and Main, is looking for lunch. Ernie Stedman from Oregon, 4 feet high. And then coming back onto Phillips Avenue is Bird in the Hand, done by Martin Eichinger from Oregon. Great artist, new artist for us. This is 44 inches high. He's known nationally. We can't put any sculptures up by 8th because of the construction on Phillips for sure, and we had a couple, actually we had 3 there this year. This sculpture is going to be in front of U.S. Bank, which is far enough from the intersection. It's right in front of the bank. Nice size, 60 inches high. And then we go way over on the east side of the bridge on 8th Street. Another new artist, Chris Cobain from Minnesota. It's a blast. This is 9 feet high, and we're going to put it on a 3-foot pedestal at the entrance to Sharapa Place. And then further east in front of the Crane Building is going to be Flora Grande. You need nice, colorful, big sculpture in that site because it's kind of hidden. And this is almost 14 feet high, coming from Washington, another new artist. Luke Octoberg, another new artist. He goes to the University of Kentucky, Plum. This will be on the corner of 8th and Reed, right on the corner of 8th and the Railroad Center. And then coming back over to Phillips, up on 9th in front of First National Bank will be Canteen Lady, Sandra Johnson's sculpture. She's been with us every year. And next is Pat Field, new artist from British Columbia, Sculpture Walker. This is a yellow marble, big, heavy sculpture. And then further south in front of the First Financial Center is Lord Grizzly by Lee Looning and Sherry Treby. And then Good Morning by Esther Benedict. She's had a couple of big horses in Sculpture Walk. Now we have a rooster, and this is the only place we could put it, the big planter in front of First Financial. It's 5 feet by 6 feet, so big sculpture. And then Lazy Days, this is our English sculptor, 46 inches high. We're going to have a bench made, I think, for this one. Nice sculpture. And then next to we have 2 smaller sculptures in front of Holson House, both stylistic. Rizard, this artist goes by one name. We've had him a couple years, marble. And then Foxy Lady by Georgine McGonigal from Colorado. They're about the same size. And then further south in front of Skelly's will be a new site, Friendship Knot number 2, Upeen. She's from Brooklyn. Nice big abstract sculpture, rubber band, big rubber band. And then over on 10th, we thought we would put something over in front of the Great Outdoor Store. Nice size, 12 feet high, and it's made out of steel, wood, and rock, and should be a nice sculpture for that site. And then back over onto Phillips, this is a 50-inch high sculpture. It's bronze, Felix Velez from Colorado, also a new artist. And Comedy Tragedy, Dee Clement has been with us several years from Colorado. It's a bronze, neat sculpture. And then Reflections, another new artist from Virginia, D.E. McDermott, 63 inches high, in front of Suzanne's. Further south, in front of Chef Monique's out on the bump out, will be Unleashed Dog, Noelio Gonzalez from Florida. He escaped Cuba in a raft, and now he's an artist in Florida, and he's traveling to Sioux Falls, too. And then on the corner will be High and Dry by Kyle Foken from Minneapolis, and he has his own unique style. This will be a nice sculpture for that site. And then new artist Benjamin Victor from South Dakota. This is his first year in Sculpture Walk. He's from Aberdeen, and I think he might be a professor up at Northern or a student or both. Anyway, if you can back up just for that. This is 7.5 feet tall. It's going in front of Dakota Bank. Pretty neat sculpture. And then Zion, another new South Dakota artist, Grant Standard, is from the Black Hills. And this doesn't do it justice. It's going to be a bright copper and brass piece. It's really going to be outstanding. And then down the block to the south, in front of Michelle's Coffee Shop, is Singing in the Dark, Martin Eichinger's second sculpture. Birth of the Scythian Ram will be in front of 334 Cafe. Tim Nimmo won Best of Show last year. Dana Parlier from Brooklyn, Skydiver will be a new site right off the south, well, it'd be off the north corner of the Federal Building. And this will be, 8, 10 feet high. And then we thought this adds a little humor, too, to the Federal Building. The Watchdog, Louise Peterson. This is our third Great Danes. I think this might be it for her in Great Danes. She does other sculptures as well. Tranquil, done by Shohini Ghosh in front of Federal Courthouse. And then on the corner in front of Midco will be Melt, done by Robert Bruce of Sioux Falls. And this is going to be a pretty good-sized sculpture. And then this fits well with the next one, which is Tundra, which is across the street. And I don't know if this is a full-size musk ox, but this is one-of-a-kind piece. She did the lioness that's in front of the Holiday Inn. A very good artist from Maryland. And then up on the northwest corner of 12th and Phillips will be 27. And this is a sculpture of Chinese bicycle handlebars, 27 of them welded together. So it's kind of unique. It's going to be in the planter there in the corner. It's big. And then the next one is Expectations, Sergei's second sculpture, 6 feet high. We're going to put this one in front of Bechtold's, also aluminum. And then moving north in front of Meyer Henry's law firm will be Fall and Winter Vessel by Ben Hammond. And then in front of Minerva's, the 51st sculpture will be Ben Victor's second sculpture, Robert the Bruce, 34 inches high, 24 long. Neat sculpture. And then we have alternates that we need approval on, and we have, 10 or 15 of them. Raptor Cortez. This is in case any of the other first 51 drop out, and we may have to call on these. Paul Revere by D. Clements, Tween by James Hare of Colorado, St. Joseph by Nick Lagueros of Minneapolis, Indian Dancer by Georgine McGonigal, Home of the Brave, Ben Victor, Land of the Free by Ben Victor, Equus, Tom Herzog, and Delightful by Carol Cunningham, On the Wings of Hope by Martin Eichinger, and Dance of Life. Actually, this one I think is going to go to the indoor at Avera. And Trapezoids by Joe Sackett, Man in Motion, Dennis Klein from British Columbia. We might get that next year. Sing in the Dark, Racing Horse, and Urban Buffalo. And I think that's it. Any questions?
I have a question. Brenda, can you go back to the one of the guy standing, the Roman-looking guy in the cloth? And while she's looking for that, it's about a third of the way back. Mm-hmm. These sculptures, now, do they travel around from various communities, or what happens to them after, when we're done with them and they go? What's the...
Well, some of them get sold and stay. Some are leased and stay. Some the artists pick up and take them to other shows, other places. There are a handful of other programs around the country. Lee Looning told me you can't create a sculpture just for one show, so they like to be able to take them to other places. I think Sheridan, Wyoming has a show, Gillette.
Okay.
And
sometimes they get bought. And
yes,
yeah.
Yes. We've sold 80 in 6 years.
Okay, I just think, is it me or is this a remarkable resemblance to Councilor Litz? Did you model for this?
He's not wearing a pink shirt.
Any questions for Jim? Councilor Staggers?
Yeah, Jim, how many works were submitted total?
If I remember right, we had about 130.
130, wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned, too, that you got a 15% cut. So how much money did you end up getting from the city then after that?
Well, we'll get $15,000 for the People's Choice purchase of the sculpture, and then I think it's about $6,500 for pedestals and concrete pads and that sort of thing. But we're okay. We're fine. Mm-hmm. We don't need the 10. So it was 25 total to begin with.
Well, Jim, on behalf of the council, I know every year we're excited to have the sculpture walk downtown. It's a tremendous part of the downtown experience, and I think the I don't know if you keep any numbers on it, but it's got to be growing every year, so we're certainly appreciative of the work that you do personally for the program.
Thank you.
Same as Russ as well, same to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, and thanks for all your support.
Okay, we'll move on to the second presentation. Is the Second Amendment to the amended and restated commitment agreement with Lewis and Clark Regional Water System, presented by Robert Edmondson, the city attorney, Greg Greenfield, and a host of others.
Well, I'm happy to announce that I worked on this over the weekend. I filled out this yellow pad so I could fill you in on all that's in this, but I'm going to spare you the time. I'm just happy to announce that this was approved by the Lewis and Clark group last week after a long, hard, bargaining to get everything done and watch out for the interests of our citizens. And I was looking at the history of this, and I was telling the gentleman today, this started out in 1990 as Southeastern South Dakota Water Supply. Articles of incorporation, there were 8 members from around the area. The only constant one that's still in it today is Sioux Falls, and now there are 19. And, we have a large interest in it, but we have 1 vote. So that's something that we always have to remember, is that, and sometimes with the majority rules, it's difficult to deal with. I was put into this back when I first came here, and these gentlemen, Kevin, Greg, and Burian, were involved in it. They've educated me. They've done a wonderful job representing the city's interest in this, and we're very proud to present you. And we do have a slide presentation if you'd like it. We've sent you a copy of the memorandum, the documents, the project summary report, and those are critical things because it sets methodology to figure out where you're at, what you might owe, so you can plan for the future, and also on the interim true-ups. But if there's, we're ready to go with, you want the slide presentation, and we're ready to present it. It's okay with the council, all right? We'll just say this. Any questions about what goes on at the board meetings? I've got Mr. Smith. He's there.
Good evening. I'm Greg Greenfield. This is Steve Burian. Where do we start? Everybody's sick of winter. Everybody's sick of snow. Everybody's worrying about potential flooding. Everybody's worrying about potholes. And right now it's really hard to think about drought. But that's why we're up here, because we need to think about that. That day will come when everything isn't going to be as well as it is right now. Water isn't always a bad thing. A lot of times it's compared to the next oil. We think where we're at with Lewis and Clark is that through our participation that we'll have additional waters here in 2012. In addition to that, we're going to potentially have 28 million gallons per day. This started in 1990. As Justice Amundsen said, in 1993 there was a 4-page commitment agreement, which really didn't say much of anything because at that time it was more or less not authorized by Congress, and everybody wanted to see where it was going to go. In 2004, Steve and AE2S did a future water supply evaluation recommending that the city get an additional 17 million gallons a day of capacity from Lewis and Clark. I need to go back, and what isn't on that graph is in the year 2000, Congress authorized Lewis and Clark. And the authorization, there's a key point that needs to be understood in the authorization, and that is that while other members are paying about 10% for their project costs after they get state match and federal match, that Sioux Falls, on its base capacity, on its first 11 million gallons, is paying 50% of those costs, and on its additional capacity is paying 100% of those costs. You need to keep that in mind as we go forward on base and additional capacity when we get into the allocations. AE2S determined there was a little graph that summed it all up for me in 2004 that had the capital costs of building our own pipeline to the river or had the capital costs of proceeding with Lewis and Clark and using their system. And also on that graph were the operational costs. And while the operational costs for doing our own thing to the river were quite low, the capital costs were extraordinarily expensive. The recommendation was made by AA2S and approved by the council to go forward. 2005, the amended and restated commitment agreement. That's what we're looking at changing here, but the reason we needed the amended and restated commitment agreement was because money was starting to come in from the federal government. Things were gearing up, contracts were being let, and we needed to decide how was this going to work with the money that Sioux Falls was going to invest as far as reserves, as far as a final true-up, as far as priorities on building different parts of the system. That was passed. Then there was a First Amendment to the ARCA, and the reason for the First Amendment to the ARCA, as you may recall, is that there's a certain component of the federal program that is indexing, and indexing is really another name for inflation, but it isn't the same as inflation because it goes off the Bureau of Recommendations Western Division cost of construction. But there are certain assumptions that you make on indexing, and that the reason the city went forward and approved of the First Amendment was to prepay the amount of monies that the city, the estimated amount of monies that the city was going to put into Lewis and Clark. In that prepayment, our hope was to stop the indexing. In the memo that I sent to everybody, I need to tell you one thing, though, about the city's prepayment. Is that all the money that the city's going to put into Lewis and Clark? And the answer is no. It was never that amount of money, because if you remember a previous presentation, we always had the well development costs, and we also had the cost by which the cost of construction may be less or more than the engineer's estimate, and that's what you deal with on the final true-up. Plus, you have to look at the monies from the states and the monies from the federal government and come up with some type of crystal ball number. Well, that's what we did. We can change the slide. And that money was paid in 3 different installments, and everything was going good. And then there was a train wreck when we let the bid for the water treatment plant. That bid came in much, much, much higher. Lewis and Clark couldn't cash flow, and so we went back in 2008 to the phased approach, and we've basically been negotiating with Lewis and Clark since then to come up with the Second Amendment. Next slide. That's everybody that's working on this. We do have a letter from Betsy Abbey at Lindquist and Venom that the way we want to do the Second Amendment does meet our bond covenants that were part of the First Amendment. The benefits of phasing. Well, there was one good thing that happened with phasing. And the good thing that happened with phasing is that the bid climate totally changed when the bottom of the market fell out of construction. That resulted in a savings to the system of about $55 million and resulted in a savings to Sioux Falls of almost $12 million. The purpose of the Second Amendment. This was the slide that we went through the last time that I was in front of you, so I'll go quickly. Allocation of funds. You need to be able to allocate the funds between base and additional capacity so you're knowing what you're paying for. The allocation of funds that's been done with Lewis and Clark is that the city has prepaid for all of its additional capacity. The methodology for an interim true-up, the interim true-up only deals with the true-up on additional capacity. We were able to reach an agreement with Lewis and Clark as to how to calculate that interim true-up. Steve will go into more detail on the numbers and what we can use it for. There is a methodology for a final true-up. That methodology never really changed from the amended and restated commitment agreement, other than that we now have a spreadsheet and we have methods in order to give the city an idea of where it stands on the final true-up. Remember that on the interim true-up, it's only for Sioux Falls additional capacity. For the final true-up, it's on additional capacity and base system capacity. Costs of well development we will deal with as we proceed, and the compromise that was reached in the Second Amendment. Guaranteeing system completion was something that was already done in the First Amendment, but has been beefed up, and water rates, Steve will address. Go ahead, Steve.
Good afternoon. I guess as part of all of these negotiations, my role as an engineering consultant was to do some of the more detailed analysis, and so I've been asked to present a few of the more detailed slides this afternoon. I think you were all provided with a copy of the project information summary. This was a document that was co-authored by Dave Odens of Banner and Associates and myself, and its intent was to help support the negotiation of the Second Amendment. The first thing that I've been asked to talk about this afternoon is the allocation of funds. And what this had to do with is that Lewis and Clark, as it went through the construction, originally didn't have quite such a complex system with base capacity and additional capacity. And so its accounting system was more set up in terms of accepting the money, tying that number to an index number, and then putting it into a single pool of dollars from which it would spend on the construction. Well, as we got into this, it was quickly recognized that having a better understanding of how those dollars were split for Sioux Falls between base system capacity and additional capacity was critical to the overall accounting of the system as it related to an interim true-up, as it related to a final true-up, and as it related to the bond covenants. And so we worked through a protocol to try to determine how much of the money that Sioux Falls paid in its dues, which were easier, and then its prepayment, which is a little more complicated, to try to determine what was the split in those dollars between base system capacity and Sioux Falls additional capacity, so those dollar amounts could be memorialized moving forward. The important part of that, I guess, that Greg mentioned was the indexing, and one of the reasons that you want to know these dollars and have them tied down is when they set the value of that number. For an expense, it sets the number at a lower number, and that number, gets value over time. And similar for the revenue, if you set that at a lower index value, it goes up with the indexing, and so $1 today with time value money is going to be worth more than $1 in the future, which is pretty much intuitive. But that was the big impetus for this. In terms of the interim true-up, I explained this a little bit last time before I was in front of you. As Greg mentioned, this was a compromise that was intended to just deal with the Sioux Falls additional capacity. And for that Sioux Falls additional capacity, they wanted to compare the amount of money that you gave to them that was attached to an additional capacity and compare that to the cost for additional capacity. And you remember what we ended up paying for on additional capacity was 100% of the increment. So they looked at the system without that additional capacity, looked at the cost of that system with the additional capacity, and that difference is the amount that we had to pay on for capital costs. And that calculation is supposed to be completed within 90 days of the completion of Phase 2 of the water plant, which is currently scheduled for 2012. Now, when we went into this, I think there was a sense by many that we were going to end up owing money as part of this. And due to the several factors, one being the way that the dollars were documented in terms of their split, one being some suggested changes to their system where Sioux Falls actually went in and said, we don't think this is necessary, we don't think it needs to be constructed as part of the system to meet our needs. And then finally, that real favorable bid climate in association with phasing of the water plant all resulted in savings. And so if we looked at the interim true-up, the estimated cost or the value of the interim true-up in 2012 dollars is currently $9.7 million to the good. So that's dollars that they would owe you. Now, per the agreement, that it could either be accepted, I guess, in cash, or it could be maintained in the system. And from our benefit, there are some things that we need to do that we feel is very beneficial to keep those costs there. You'll remember that we end up paying for half of the 85th Street Tower. You can see on the slide here that we get a full credit for that as part of the interim true-up. In addition, as part of the negotiation of the Second Amendment, we are going to be responsible for 17/27ths of all the additional wells that are built as part of the system. And Greg explained that when he was before you last time, that it was going to be very difficult to determine which wells were base, which ones were additional. Did we get to the close ones? Did we get the far ones? When we negotiate with Lewis and Clark, we'll just pay 17/27ths of all the wells when they're constructed and eliminate that factor, which was a pretty good savings for the City of Sioux Falls. But as part of that, we do have to pay for those when they're constructed, and so it created a potential immediate cash demand for the city. But because of that extra money that we have for the interim true-up, the first $4.25 million of wells in 12 and 13 will be fully covered by the interim true-up. We'll still have $2.8 million remaining after that, and the total estimated cost for the wells are $8.6 million in 2017, So there is one remaining cash demand that Greg introduced of about $5.8 million that we need to be aware of, as well as the final true-up when that manifests itself. Moving on to the final true-up, it's the same methodology as the interim true-up, only in this case the final true-up is intended to address base system costs only because they've bifurcated the additional capacity cost into the interim true-up. There was always a sense that this would need to be done, but there wasn't a good way of calculating that, and so we put together a comprehensive protocol on how the revenue should be tracked, how the expenses should be tracked. We've, based on the latest and greatest information, we've put together an estimate of that, which is Exhibit 6 within the Second Amendment to the ARCA, and that can then be calculated on an annual basis to give you some sense for any costs that you may have down the road upon system completion. Based on the protocol and the current information, it is estimated there would be a deficiency of about $750,000 that you'd have to come up with upon system completion, and right now we're looking at envisioning that in $2020, so we've marched that forward so you'd have a better sense of what that future dollar may be. So interim true-up, very positive, a minor deficiency in terms of the final true-up. Now this number is going to change every year. Each time they bid a project, they're going to lock in the value of that project. Some might be overestimate, some might be underestimate, and as that transpires over time, this number will change, and we'll be able to bring that number back to you as our contingent liability moving forward. I probably stole most of my thunder on this one in terms of the well development, in terms of having to present that, but there was that potential controversy that was mitigated by assigning all the remaining well capacity. 10/27ths will be base, of which we pay our share through previous payments, and then 17/27ths will be additional capacity that we pay as they go. The one thing that we did put as controls for you is that they cannot build those wells unless they have a demonstrable, and I might screw up the exact legal term, but a demonstrable need for that capacity. And so if they're coming along and they don't have enough hooked up membership to justify building those wells, they can't just do that arbitrarily. They have to show that they have a need for that, with the only exception being if for instance, a major stimulus bill came across and it was in everybody's best interest to capture those dollars. That was one exception that was documented in the Second Amendment. In terms of looking at system completion, Greg talked about how this was always in the ARCA, but it's been beefed up. We have the ability in this case in 2023, if the Phase 3 of the water plant has not been built, and you remember Phase 3 of the water plant is essentially our capacity that we're allowing them to use during the interim to allow the project to move forward, because we did not feel we would need it right away, but we needed protection for that. And so as a result, we have the right to ask for that in 2 years, and then they have to either build that through federal money, through money that they get from alternate financing, or a capital call. And then there's a very good protection in there if the capital call is not made and heeded, that we get an overweighting of the capacity that's already been built, which in my mind, the attorneys would never probably say this, but it provides an extremely large incentive for the other members to step up and do that. Many of those systems are getting 100% of their capacity from Lewis and Clark, so should they have to take a reduced capacity in the future, it would not be a viable strategy for them. And so I think this is more than just words on paper. It's a very strong protection that the City of Sioux Falls has. The last thing that you definitely want assurances of, and there was some discussion at the last meeting about rates, you'll be paying 3 different rates to Lewis and Clark on an ongoing basis. You'll be paying a base cost per million gallons per day that's fixed per month with no water usage. If and when additional capacity is added, you'll be paying another fixed cost per month per MGD with no water used to be assigned to the amount of capacity that you have that's additional capacity. And then there'll be a postage stamp rate for the entire system where they take all operating costs, variable operating costs, and divide those by the projected amount of water sales. That's projected to be 78 cents per thousand right now, gallons, and you'll pay that as a postage stamp rate. The fixed cost for the base system is being charged proportionally amongst all the members that have base system capacity. Much like your capital cost, the fixed cost for additional capacity will be charged based on an estimate of the incremental cost of production, or incremental fixed cost of production. So once again, what were the fixed costs of the system without additional capacity? What were the fixed costs for the system with additional capacity? And you'll only pay for that difference, not your proportional share. And then On the variable rate, you're only obligated to use, at this point in time, 2.75 million gallons per day. That's 25% of 11.007 MGD of your base system capacity. As you take on additional capacity, the minimum does not increase as part of that. And so that's more of an insurance policy for you than it is a mandated usage. I think Greg was going to wrap up with then the bottom line.
One thing that we maybe should have had a slide on and didn't have a slide on is the amount of water that's going to be available to the City of Sioux Falls during the interim period. We're going to always get our 11.007 in base system capacity, and as wells are added, we are going to get 17/27ths of the amount of capacity added until we get an additional 8.16. So the total during the interim period will be potentially 19.16 million gallons per day, with the caveat that we can also buy surplus capacity in the event that people aren't using it, with the caveat that in the event that Lewis and Clark did not complete the system, that what we would be entitled to is our 17 million gallons in additional capacity plus the amount of capacity above that times a fraction whose numerator is our original reserve capacity and whose denominator is the capacity of all the connected members. But in the memo that I sent to you, I think that we can possibly get up to about 23 million gallons a day if the system wouldn't be completed. So I wanted you to know that that's how much water is going to be available. Once the system is built, we're entitled to 28 million gallons a day. Basically, what the interim water, or what the Second Amendment does, is substitute the word assured availability for all the water we were going to get. Bottom line, we get to move forward with the continued development of Lewis and Clark as a supplemental supply. They're going to have us the water by 2012. That's all a good thing. One of the things that we did along with other members is prepay, which really allowed the system, before they knew they were going to get $52 million from the federal government, and really let the system go forward. So I thank the council for doing that. Establishing financial provisions and procedures, we've come a long way since when we were going to do this as a single phase. It was basically, I always joke, going to be kind of run like my wife's checkbook, that you just keep writing checks as long as you have check blanks. But that's how it was all run together. And now there's a method that we're going to do the allocation between base and additional capacity, and Steve's done a great job of working on those protocols. The financial projections, what you need to know is that we need to know what those remaining well costs are going to be ahead of time, because somehow we're going to have to pay for them, because that's money up front. We don't wait for the final true-up to pay on the remaining well costs. Once that capacity is built, we're going to get a bill. And we're going to use our interim surplus to pay that, but then as we go forward, we're really going to have to pay attention so that we can that's cash out, and it's cash out right away. The other thing on the final true-up is that I'm glad that we're going to be able to come back to you year after year and tell you where we think we're at on the final true-up, because the water rates have to reflect the ability to deal with that final true-up. And until the Second Amendment, we haven't had the ability to do that. I just told you we can use the surplus towards well development and cost share in the 85th Street Tower. System completion, we already had, but we can get the more water. Resulted in significant cost savings. It did. A lot of that's due to the bid climate, but nonetheless, everybody's a better quarterback on Monday morning than they were on Sunday, and it is fair. After working on this for 5 years, I already said last time, is it perfect? No. Is it fair? Yes. Stephen, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Councilor Staggers?
Yes, on the 85th Street Tower, Lewis and Clark, do they own that tower?
It's going to be owned by Lewis and Clark, and we're going halvesies with them. half and half. The city had the land, but the city had the land appraised and then contributed it to Lewis and Clark, for which we were entitled to a credit from figuring out the amount.
But we paid half the cost.
Right.
And the rest of the communities, are they paying anything for that?
Well, that all comes into additional capacity.
Okay, this is just for additional capacity?
Well, go ahead, Kevin. Good afternoon, Kevin Smith with the Office of Public Works. The main purpose of splitting the cost of that 3 million gallon tank specifically out was because we had needs for a 1.5 million gallon tank there of our own. And rather than us building a 1.5 million gallon tank and them building a 1.5 million gallon tank for their system, we kind of combined forces, took advantage of a better bid climate, and through a separate agreement previously approved, entered into that funding arrangement. But I'd say that is a unique system component because we had land. We were going to build our own tank there. They needed to build a tank for the system, so we simply combined the capacities and built one tank. So we had to pay for our half, basically.
I guess my concern is that it belongs to Lewis and Clark, and we're paying half of that water tower for Lewis and Clark.
That's correct.
I mean, why didn't Lewis and Clark pay us half, and that could be our own tower?
Because
Our own property.
we didn't need to build a 3 million gallon per day, 3 million gallon tank, and that's what they built. 1.5 million gallons is ours, essentially, our capacity.
Kevin, can I assume that we have the rights to the use of that tank for the useful life of the tank?
Yes, it's water that's going to be flowing in through a valve at 85th Street and Meredith Avenue, so it's Lewis and Clark water that we need to buy anyway.
Yeah.
It's
So
really
why-
good for both parties.
So, you mean, the ownership goes to Lewis and Clark. Why didn't it go to us?
Well, we won't have to pay for the maintenance and repair and operation of it, for one thing, so we share 50/50 in the construction cost, but when it comes to the operation, maintenance, and repair, that will be up to the system.
Okay, well,
That's a
we're paying
benefit to us.
For and indirectly. Yeah. Okay, so that belongs to Lewis and Clark. The fixed costs, Steve, we have our fixed costs. Now, the other communities, for the base, so the fixed costs for the other communities, how is that established?
Well, there's,
And in other words, is it proportional or can
right,
Yeah.
well, yes, it's proportional if you let me off that easy. It's probably more complicated of an answer if you want me to give it.
Uh-huh.
The contract has a very specific schedule in it, dating back to the ARCA, where you take their budget, and their budget, take a line item like water plant labor, there's a specific range in there for that it's, let's say, 60 to 70% fixed costs and 30 to 40% variable costs. And by contract, we have every one of their line items in their budget in this schedule, and that schedule then defines whether it's fixed costs, whether it's variable costs. And then from there, the fixed costs get assigned to base system capacity, and minus the amount that goes to surplus capacity, which is just that increment, or additional capacity, and the remaining fixed costs then are divided by the system capacity of the connected base system members proportionally to determine their rate. And so if we had $3 million and we had 27.19 MGD of connected base system capacity, we'd take $3 million annually divided by 27.19 to get a cost per MGD. We divide that by 12 to get the monthly cost, and we take that monthly cost by the number of capacity we have, which in our case is 11.007. So it's a completely proportional rate that's the same for everybody as far as base system capacity costs.
Okay. And then also, one other question I have is, over the years, we talk about, $70 million for Lewis and Clark and a few million here. What is the total cost we've paid so far, and what is the total cost that we can know right now that we're going to be paying in the future? The City of Sioux Falls.
I don't want to misquote you on this one. The total amount of money that we've paid in base system costs is $25 million, $25.5 million.
Okay, base.
And the total amount, and then there's an adjustment that we also paid on. That adjustment was $2.8 million. And then we also paid on the additional capacity to date $45.6 million. And those are all in what I'd call nominal dollars, and so that'd be the dollars that you'd be more comfortable with. It's the dollars as they were paid, so it's real dollars.
Yeah.
We then had to go index those to some kind of constant platform, but the 25.6, the 2.8, and the 45.6 are in a rough sense are the amount, or I'm sorry, right. The 45.6 were the numbers that you've paid in so far in nominal dollars. And then in addition to that, then, of that, you have a credit of $9.8 million on the interim true-up. But that interim true-up credit then will be offset by the half of the 85th Street Tower and the first two well increments of $4.2 million. So you have the $2.7 million offset and the $4.3 million offset. And then we have another well cost out in the future of $5.8 million, and we have that true-up if and when it's correct of $750,000. And so I gave you the total numbers that were in terms of remaining costs. The only two that are identified right now are $5.8 million for the wells and $750,000 for a base system true-up.
So the total cost so far is, I was trying to add these together here.
You guys always do this to me, so I did my calculator.
I don't know, about 74 million?
I got about 80.55 million. And that's obviously a lot of rounding. But
Yes, sure, 80.5 million so far. And then once again, then we have that additional cost that we're aware of.
that's everything. That 80.5, I added up the three numbers I originally
Okay.
gave you, plus 5.8 plus 0.75.
Okay. And I know it's probably an impossible question to ask, but would you have any rough estimate on maybe how much more we would be paying then?
Well, that's the.
Well, no, with all these other unknowns that we might.
I think one of the ideas of this was to try to put an estimate down on all the unknowns, and so the only two numbers that we have estimated at this point are that $5.8 million, which is roughly at system completion 2017 to 2020, and then the $750,000 as a base system true-up are the only additional capital costs that don't have an offsetting credit that we will be putting in your rate model when we complete that this year.
Okay.
All of that's found in
Yes.
Exhibit 5.1
5.1.
on the ARCA.
In really small print. So
Yeah. Page 30.
I think it's also on 6.1. But
Okay.
And the other, answering the question of where we're going to be at the end, we have the final true-up. You have to remember that the good thing is it's only on base system capacity. So we're being treated the same as all the other members on the final true-up and the methods for doing it, because we prepaid for our additional capacity. And the number I can tell you, and Steve can't either, is how much our bid costs are going to be above or below engineers' estimates. The year that the bid broke the bank, the bid plus contingency, engineering, and legal fees was $168 million. It's been a lot better than that, but that's what the final true-up does, is it looks at the money you get from the federal government, the state government, and then your project costs. And you have to even up those project costs. I can't tell you what that's going to be without knowing how far above or below bid we're going to be. But we did the best we could with the final true-up. But that's still the wild card.
And then also, too, this agreement continues on and on? In other words, do we have any points in the future where we have to negotiate again, or is this just whenever?
That should be a possibility. We negotiate 3 times,
Sure, yeah.
and it goes on to 2055, does it?
Yes.
But the thing you don't want to forget here is these gentlemen have gotten the ability for all members, just not Sioux Falls, all members, to have methodologies and ways to figure out that they're being billed fairly. And that was one of the missions, and that's been done to the best of our ability, and they've done a wonderful job. And to say that we can, if I could look off in the crystal ball and give you that figure, I'd probably be doing something else, but I can't do that. And you might want me to, but if I could.
Well, Kevin and I have talked about, where this is going. You want to address that, Kevin? It depends on what the federal government does, is a short answer to the question. Lewis and Clark has planned around having $35 million come in from the federal government for the foreseeable future. I think that the administration's offer was considerably less than that, $2 million. And now it will go to conference committee, and the other members have paid up. And so one of the things that might happen is that despite the yearly appropriations, despite the stimulus money of $52 million from the omnibus bill, and despite all the members' prepayments, once that money is, and Congress is using, because we gave you the stimulus money, you're not going to be entitled to so much more every year. But depending on where all of that goes, once all of that money is spent, there may have to be some real significant discussions on alternative financing for completing the system. And that, I imagine, will be a whole other round of negotiations. The current amended and restated commitment agreement says that the City of Sioux Falls has to use its best efforts to reasonably cooperate in the financing. So that's where it's left.
Reasonably cooperate in financing.
Use our best efforts to look at whatever the alternative.
That doesn't mean we're going to be a bank, does it?
No.
Okay.
No, it means we have to use our best efforts to cooperate.
Okay.
That was the words. Those were the words.
And Greg, we're still on track to have treated water, or is it untreated water, treated or untreated?
Well, we had the
water
option,
by-
if they never got the water treatment plant done, we had the raw water agreement, and we had the 125% clause if things all didn't work. But they have worked. The contracts have been let. The transmission line is going to be completed, and 2012 is still the date, although they moved it from the spring, I think, until a little bit further into the summer. Is that right?
Because of the treatment plant.
Because of the treatment plant.
And the treatment plant will be completed when?
Fall of 2012.
Okay. So we should be able to get treated water by 2012.
It's the
And
hope.
like we said last time, barring some kind of major delay in the construction schedule, but the contract calls for that substantial completion and final completion before those dates.
Now, how much we buy is going to be another issue. In practicality, the city's able to produce its own water cheaper than it's able to purchase water from Lewis and Clark. Did I speak on the school, Kevin?
Councilor Bennigan?
Well, obviously, we went into this process knowing that we needed the water at some point, and it drives the whole economic engine of the community. So that's concrete, if you will. A couple of questions I had was, on the issue of the water treatment plant, you said we saved about $11.8 million in phasing that rather than doing it all at one time. But how much money did we save when we prepaid from what our bond costs were to the construction indexing cost? Do you have any idea?
Steve, you know what we say? I mean, there's so many assumptions that go into what we saved over time on the indexing.
But it had to be significant.
Yes.
The indexing from 8 to 9, and I'm in the ballpark, was somewhere between 12 and 13%. So just in that year alone, on a 64.281 net bond proceeds, take 10% of that, we saved, we locked in $6 million of extra value for that particular note that you issued. We had a slight decrease in indexing from 9 to 10, and so there's some offsets. And I think on average, we're using 4 to 5% as our projected number, and so every year that we lock that in, we should be saving 4 to 5%.
The federal government doesn't give you your money back when the indexing goes below zero.
Understand that, but the bottom line for me is feeling very good about the process that we're at this point, because not only did we save some money through the phasing, but we also saved significant dollars in the prepayment, if you will, on the construction loan. And those are the things that people don't want to talk about. They only talk about the hard cost. But frankly, without those two, it would have cost us a lot more money.
Yeah, and it would have basically, until the stimulus money stalled the project, because you have to think about time, too. I mean, the component you didn't add in was, we're getting to the finish line sooner, too.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Councilor Anderson?
Due to any problems with the treatment plant, Mark, this might be for you guys too, or Kevin. Are we going to have the ability to treat that extra water if they're not able to get that treatment plant done? If we take untreated water from Lewis and Clark?
I think the more likely scenario, if that were to take case, Mr. Councilmember Anderson, is that we'd probably negotiate a delay unless we're in a drought event, because I think they're geared up now for everything to be finished water, and they'd be very reluctant to want to put raw water through there and try to clean up the pipeline. But if something catastrophic happened and we really needed the water and they did have to go to some kind of raw water strategy, the water treatment plant has sufficient capacity. Because what happens in a drought is you start to lose well capacity and treatment and river capacity, but not treatment capacity. So there'd be more than excess capacity to treat that if it were necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Starr?
Yes, it was mentioned that the cost of the water from Lewis and Clark will be more than our water treatment plant right now. All of us were aware of that. But what is the difference probably going to be in cost? Rough?
Greg Anderson, your new water superintendent, and I are in somewhat of a numerical debate on this issue, and so I'm not sure if it's safer to present his numbers or my numbers. But in terms of some of the calculations that we did early on that we've quoted to you in past, I mentioned earlier that the unit cost that Lewis and Clark is going to charge is 78 cents per thousand. If we bought 2.7 million gallons per day of water, that would be about 1 billion gallons a year. And 1 billion gallons a year, if we didn't have to use the energy and chemicals, Greg has estimated that we'd save about $490,000 by not producing 1 billion gallons. And so if you take 78 cents times 1 billion, that's $780,000 of cost, new cost, and $490,000 of net reduction. The difference between those two numbers would be your implied savings for that year, because we're going to get the same revenue regardless. We're going to charge that to the customer at your prevailing rate, so the revenue should be the same. On the cost side, we'd pay more for that water than we would save in terms of net chemical costs. But I do have to caution you that Greg and I are working on two different versions of spreadsheets, and I have a conference call with him next week to make sure that stands the test of time.
But as far as per thousand gallons, you said 78 cents for Lewis and Clark. How much are we, what's our cost right now with our water treatment plant?
Would you calculate $1.63?
Steve, if I...
Okay, I guess, I thought you mentioned that Lewis and Clark would be more. Or did I misunderstand?
Well, you have the $1.86 is all your costs. It's all your fixed costs and all your variable costs. And so when you cease production, in a given year, not going to send, you can't get rid of facilities, you can't send people home, you can't get rid of the auditing department, all of those things. And so really the only true savings are chemicals, electricity, and if we really want to get down to details, we'll probably process a little bit less sludge that we put out into the sludge disposal system. And so you really can't compare the $1.86 to the 75. You have to compare your marginal cost of production to the 75 cents. And that's what Greg and I are trying to work through the details.
Any other questions?
I had one comment for Councilor Benninger. Another savings that I didn't think of is that by not having to run the water treatment plant lines all the way down to the south, that was also considerable cost savings for the city to the extent that the Lewis and Clark water was going to come up instead of the city having to build down.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Any City Council open discussion before we adjourn? If not, just a reminder, the Public Service Committee will meet immediately following this meeting, and we are adjourned.